Welcome to the virtual roundtable exploring the role of network fabric for successful SD-WAN deployment, hosted by our friends at Connected2Fiber. I'm Dean Perrine, Executive Vice President at JSA, and welcome viewers to the roundtable. This roundtable will explore the critical importance of network fabric transparency and why understanding where applications and people are and how you can easily connect with them is of critical importance in the delivery of SD-WAN. A quick housekeeping note, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the question field throughout the roundtable, and we will do our absolute best to get through as many of those as possible in the allotted time. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. They are Mr. Dean Campbell. Dean is the Chief Technology Officer of Light River. He also has a great first name. We have Mr. Brian O'Connor. Brian is the Director of Solutions Engineering at Granite Telecommunications. And finally, our host, Mr. Ben Edmond. Ben is the CEO at Connected2Fiber. Okay, let's go ahead and dig in for some background purposes. Why don't we start with a quick description of each of your respective companies and your place in the larger network and SD-WAN discussion. Dean, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Thanks, Dean. Light River Technologies, we're a network integrator. We specialize in building carrier class critical infrastructure telecom networks. We're a multi-vendor provider, so we resell hardware as well as providing design and implementation services. And we actually have a practice that's pretty heavily involved these days with network automation and kind of the SDN component of the world these days. So.
Very good. Brian?
Yeah, sure. I'm Brian O'Connor, working for Granite Telecommunications. We're a $1.6 billion privately held MSP and aggregator, typically focusing on the WAN side of the SD-WAN piece, but also doing managed Wi-Fi services and switch services on the inside. Our big business is aggregating multiple circuits at a location from all different underlying carriers.
Excellent. And Ben?
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate you having us today. And thanks, Brian and Dean. I am the CEO of Connected2Fiber. Connected2Fiber is a software platform built for the connectivity industry. We help service providers create a digital blueprint of their addressable market so they can orchestrate in real time critical workflow and decisions around the buying and selling of connectivity. We serve just over 160 service providers managing just over 700 million locations around the world at this point, and excited to jump in the discussion today.
Excellent. Let's go ahead and do just that. Our first meat and potatoes question: how has network fabric topology changed in the last decade, and what are the primary drivers of this change? Brian, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. So from our perspective, we've seen a huge shift in the market from copper services over to fiber-based services, as well as moving from traditional MPLS services into more symmetrical internet access, or even best effort, the same kind of internet that you have at home. So what we've done is built a business on understanding the customer's needs that are unique in every business. Every customer has unique needs, and what kind of access that they're going to need at their location. Wi-Fi, obviously, and then also the advent of 4G and 5G. 4G, obviously, for a long time, but 5G is adding in another unique access type that traditionally in the past, you couldn't run a network over 3G or 2G in the back of the day, but you can actually start to run your business over 4G and now 5G. We're starting to see some customers go straight wireless access at their locations.
Yeah, I wondered if we were going to hit on that and how quickly we would, and we did right off the bat, so excellent. Ben, over to you. How has network fabric topology changed in the last decade, and what are the primary drivers of this change?
I think I have to agree with Brian. There's just been a massive change, some fundamental shifts in how the network industry works. I think the decoupling of the network fabric, going away from traditional MPLS networks to these next generation SD-WAN networks, and giving it the choice. To Brian's point, each customer is fairly unique, and the choices around the cloud platforms that they incorporate to run their business, to the locations of their employees, whether they're working from home in distributed offices, mobile, fixed, it really varies greatly. And what the network industry has really brought to the table over the last decade is the ability to accommodate that reality, and not just accommodate that, to create unique recipes to add value to the enterprise customers or the commercial customers that need to manage that complexity. And complexity it is. I think wireless, fiber, coax, copper, you name it, from an access medium, it's all the above. If you can get fiber, great. If you can get 5G, great. If not, you still have to have connectivity to the applications that power your business. You still have to have the communications fabric embedded, and we're seeing fundamental shifts of adding more infrastructure, decoupling choices, and increasingly being application driven. Getting access to the AWS platform, the Workday environment, the Salesforce environment, you name it, is critical to run their business.
Yeah, addressing the reality. I really feel like that is the overarching theme of many of the questions that we have. Dean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just actually, extending a little bit on what Brian and Ben both said. We take a look at it from the lens of actually the infrastructure. We design and build the actual transport topology, transport networks. We've seen, at first it was a little bit of a seep and then an ooze, and now it's starting to be more of a steady stream of the technology and the architecture and design moving its way out of the data center into the transport networks, into the service provider networks. So, along the lines of what Brian was saying, we're actually focused on delivering cloud services to the end customer now. It requires a lot more mesh. The old idea of hub and spoke in the service provider networks is really being challenged. It really is moving virtualization, and a lot of the, what we talk about, the edge of the cloud, moving the edge of the cloud as close to the consumer as possible. That's really driving significant changes in the way we design, build, and look at networks and the capability of networks that we want to prepare for in the future.
Yeah, and we're really hitting all of the all of the relevant buzzwords already in this discussion: 5G, cloud, the edge, all of that, as we move through the SD-WAN discussion. But moving on to the next question, and Ben, this one is for you to start us off. What network transport services or protocols are having the biggest impacts on the evolution or transformation of the network? Again, transport services or protocols that are having the largest impact on the evolution of the network.
I would have to step back and say, from my perspective, the visible one would be the IP networks, whether it's DIA or broadband as the transport medium of choice for SD-WAN. Not always, but the vast majority of the time these days is definitely a visible part of the equation, where access to high-speed connectivity, even public connectivity, and just the push and changes in the peering fabric to continue to improve the capabilities there is really having a meaningful impact in transitioning people from legacy networks to the next generation networks. I think equally important to talk about and think about is the impact of dark fiber in the underlying network fabric, coming from the cloud platforms, the infrastructure providers, the wireless providers. Holistically, none of this actually works well without the right infrastructure in place. And to Dean's point, there's some fundamental changes going on in network architecture and strategies, and enabling it at the customer facing side with new high-speed IP options, and putting the right infrastructure in place and making that dark fiber available for the long-term scalability, whether it's 5G, directly to a data center, directly to the enterprise, doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it all requires the right infrastructure to be in place in order to execute on the customer's expectations.
Dean, your name was just mentioned in Ben's answer. What are your thoughts here?
I absolutely agree. You know, the penetration of a routed network throughout all parts of the architecture now is something that's new. You know, for a number of years, we were making arguments as an industry about, you know, cost per bit transport, which was important, and, you know, could you do things without routers? But increasingly, we're seeing the demand for services again in this kind of mesh architecture where you're not sure which way traffic's going, the importance of routers. I think from the protocols perspective, that's it. But from the services perspective, what's really fascinating to us is look at the demand right now. 5G is absolutely kind of changing the way networks are architected and driven. A lot around, you know, overall capacity, but also capability for virtualization. You know, that's the cloud services stuff. And more importantly, 5G combined with, we see a number of our customers building overall business cases on use cases coming out that are latency sensitive and real-time applications. They may not be here today, but they're expecting them in 2 years, 3 years, and they're beginning to architect for latency sensitive, real-time, you know, edge compute, cloud compute type of applications. And they think, you know, IoT, that there's a ton of money there. Still to be proven, but everybody is sort of moving that direction right now.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that trajectory within the industry as a whole. But Brian, your thoughts here again? The question: what network transport services or protocols are having the biggest impacts on the evolution or transformation of the network?
Yeah, sure. So I think I go back to 5G and 4G, right? They're only as good as the backhaul that supports it, right? So that's why we're seeing 5G is rolling out slowly, but the infrastructure that it has to be built out by the underlying carriers to support that, to deliver it to the end user, it's an intense build out and an expensive build out, but ultimately in the end, that's going to allow you to bring those services out to the edge. And we talk about it all day now is video calls, right? We have so much more video going across the network than we ever did before. Like, you used to dial into via your phone, it was fine. Now if you dial into a conference bridge and you're not putting your face on the screen and sharing your screen, it's like it's 1985 all of a sudden. So those new applications when you have hundreds of employees doing that over a network, especially if you're still backhauling all that traffic to your data center, even for your home users, because from your security perspective, you still want to do that, then you need the underlying network to support that.
Yeah, how else are we going to get to see talking cats on a video conference, right?
Exactly.
And just a reminder to the attendees, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to throw those into the chat, and we will make sure to get to those questions at the end of our discussion. Or if you have anything that is relevant to the existing discussion, please type those in, and we will get those addressed in real time. Okay, moving on to our next question. How does the rise of software-defined networking change how we look at network fabrics, or does it change it at all? Again, the question: how does the rise in software-defined networking change how we look at network fabrics, and does it change it at all? Dean, that question is for you.
Thanks, Dean. Yeah, so this is kind of an interesting one to me, the way this question's asked. I think software-defined networking, we work with clients and we see them trying to push or pull on 3 different levers with software-defined networking. One is just the core business case, being able to do more with less, right? More with less staff, more with less human interaction, that kind of stuff. That's one of the levers that's always in the industry, right? The second one is really improving service. Time to service, you know, this is where we get into some of the customer on-demand type of services. They can provision their own services, things like that. The third one is where we really see, I think, what we're talking about, kind of the effect on the network fabric. And that's where automation and software-defined networking and all the software control of the network is really enabling us to fully exploit some of this disaggregation, some of these new products that are coming out that are much more cost-effective, much more flexible, but also, you know, it's wonderful to say, hey, I've got all these neat new components in my network, but how do I make them all work together? Who orchestrates them all? to make good music is always a challenge. And that's where we see software-defined networking really coming in, that it's helping our customers and our clients really adopt some of the newer technology, really transform their backbone to be much more agile, much more flexible, but not require hundreds of people to try to manage on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, we see software-defined networking as almost an enabling factor for a lot of these other trends that are going on in the network infrastructure as a whole.
Ben, your thoughts?
I agree with what Dean said. Software-defined networking really is a critical enabling factor. When we step back and look at how it impacts the change on the network fabric, I think the disaggregation comment is one that comes to my mind first and foremost. The ability to disaggregate the transport network from the services that are being orchestrated on the SD-WAN network for the customer, and having the administrative visibility, controls, security elements layered in across the best of breed decisions. Like from a service provider perspective, it really opens up an ability to uniquely position in the market in a really big ecosystem. If you look at IT services overall, $3+ trillion global market, there are many elements that the ability to differentiate gets really hard. How many more certified AWS solution architects or network engineer certifications can one have over another to differentiate? All that seems to be more table stakes discussion these days. But the network and the network fabric that you bring to the table, orchestrated with your SD-WAN offering, truly can be unique, with all the different permutations on performance, security, cost, latency, and especially when you start thinking about what drives that network need, where the physical people are, where the applications that enable the people to run the businesses that they're doing. And the network is, the primary, customer experience generator for that equation, in today's world. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see a massive amount of focus on that from the service provider community, whether they're physical network operators, managed service providers, or the cloud platforms themselves that, in all reality, are some of the biggest service providers in the world right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. And Brian, how does the rise of software-defined networking change how we look at network fabrics? Does it change it at all?
Absolutely changes it, obviously. I think, as Ben and Dean mentioned, especially the edge, collapsing the edge is what we're seeing a lot now, right? So it used to be you had a router, or someone mentioned earlier, just a switch, because it was just a layer 2 transport. And then you had switches behind that. And then at some point you decided to put a firewall out there because you wanted to start doing some internet break off for guest Wi-Fi. And all of a sudden, 3 projects later, you have 4 or 5 edge appliances out, and you have a complicated network. So a lot of the transitions to SD-WAN that we're seeing is we're now recollapsing that, removing all those devices and putting out a singular appliance or an HA that has 8 switch ports, that has the capability to run firewall services, that has the capability to run VMs on it for other services that they might need at the edge, like a SBC, a session border controller, and allowing that company to do breakout at the edge for their Wi-Fi services, their internet services, maybe still bringing them back on one private circuit to a direct connect with AWS or Azure in the cloud, whether it's direct or virtual. And really just that one singular appliance allows you to do all of those things now. And at the end, it's typically going to be cheaper than what you were spending to manage that network in the past, from a straight dollars, but also a complexity, right? So we have all the folks here, IT teams that are managing all these devices, that are doing break fix, managing the carriers. This really allows you to put some self-healing into the network and take back your day to start doing projects that are going to make your business more money.
Excellent. Ben, I saw you shaking your head a lot while Brian was talking. You care to Tell us what you're thinking.
I just really appreciate the comments around, simplifying the complexity, especially, the device proliferation, the requirements that puts on network managers, in a traditional sense, and the changes that we're seeing out there and the controls that allow for a very, very complex reality to be managed, with the tools and the automation and the intelligence to simplify that environment.
How about you, Dean? Any additional thoughts on that, on this question?
I think Brian and Ben covered it pretty darn well. Yeah, I agree with almost everything that's been said so far. Absolutely.
Very good. Then I am going to go ahead and move on. And again, attendees, if you have any questions, make sure to put those in the chat for us. Okay, next question. We're going to go back to you, Brian. How does network fabric automation, we've heard the word automation now said by each one of you at least once. How does network fabric automation and transparency impact the deployment of SD-WAN? Brian?
Sure. So with the appropriate pre-work, the time in the field to get SD-WAN up and running at a customer's data center or in the virtual environment or just at their actual stores or offices can be 15 or 20 minutes if you do the appropriate pre-work. Most of the SD-WAN solutions out there are what they call zero-touch provisioning, which if you have the right kind of circuits and you have the right pre-work, you have the right engineering, you understand the customer's VLAN needs or IP needs, the application flows that have to happen, you do that pre-work and it can be a very, very simple deployment. I remember when we did our first true SD-WAN rollout many years ago. Obviously you're going into that, you're doing your first customer location, you're thinking you're going to be on site for 8 hours. And we did a really good job with the customer in the pre-design phase. And the first site turn-up took 15 minutes. And that's something that we didn't expect. And obviously it doesn't always go that way, but if you do it right, absolutely. The ability to automate the deployment and automate all the updates, all the changes. You're not logging into every Cisco router and pushing a change manually. You're doing it at an orchestrator level and pushing out all those changes pre-scheduled into the network. It's extremely powerful and it's extremely simpler to manage than it was way back in the day.
Brian, that it sounds like you're talking about a very, very good and relevant case study for the discussion right now. Just to go off script just a little bit, if you don't mind, could you talk to us a little bit about some of the unexpected? I mean, I think with the unexpected 15-minute ultimate, button there was a good one. But were there any unexpected challenges maybe that you didn't foresee when you were putting together that initial deployment?
Sure, absolutely. And as staffs change at customers, right, and they have turnover, they have new IT teams, understanding or acquisitions are another great example of I'm a company, I've acquired something, I think I know what they have, but truly I really don't until we get out there. So it's not knowing that there are some physical appliances, not knowing that there's logical routes that need to be, and not really understanding what your user base is using. Great example is we deployed an SD-WAN solution to a customer and they thought they had about 50 users in the location. It's retail, so they guess Wi-Fi, so people coming in and out connecting, but it wasn't 50. It was actually their average was 400 at a time. So when you have that kind of, that changes the device that you have to use. You need to have something a little bit more powerful, and that's something that you don't expect running into it. You work with them, you think but they don't have the network. They just don't have the visibility today because they don't have something that's application aware to show them all that. So that's a real example of something that we have to take a step back and say, wow, we really need to look at this design, make sure we have the right edge device out there, make sure it's routing appropriately, and work with the customer to kind of decide, are we going to keep with what we have or are we going to make some changes?
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Ben, same question, just as a reminder, how does network fabric automation, something you know a great deal about, and transparency impact the deployment of SD-WAN?
I think it impacts it, just in a massive way. And it's something that is near and dear to my heart. When I started Connected2Fiber 5+ years ago, it was about getting transparency for service providers to understand their primary serviceability. Where are they physically connected? Where could they connect with deploying capital? Where's their physical route information, and how do they share it in a trusted way to their primary customers so they can make decisions about it? And the reality over the last 5 years and going forward is, that upfront process, the details of getting into the nuances to enable that deployment to work properly, understanding the size, the scope, the demarcation points. Is the physical infrastructure there? What are the elements of the cloud fabric that the network has to connect back into? Today, from my standpoint, 2021 is really the year of, the attribution around the digital blueprint. It's not enough just to manage your physical inventory from a location perspective. If we want to get to this reality of real-time and intent-based networking, which I fundamentally believe that the whole industry is going to be forced into, whether they want to or not. The reality is you got to digitally store those attributes. You got to set yourself up for automation success. You can't automate what you don't know. And by creating that digital blueprint, by detailing out demarcation points, device information, the physical infrastructure, and having partners that are willing to share that detail in a trusted way between service providers to make up your unique fabric is absolutely a critical step in the journey towards real-time intent-based networking.
Very good, Dean. We're unpacking a lot here, but so you get the final say on this question. Again, the question is, how does network fabric automation and transparency impact the deployment of SD-WAN? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just echoing a little bit of what Brian was talking about, if you do your due diligence and understand how to deploy SD-WAN, how it's going to actually operate within your network, the physical deployment and the operationalizing, to kind of make up a word there, is relatively straightforward. We haven't seen that many surprises or gotchas in any of our customers' deployments, any of the ones that we've been involved with at all. The interesting part is a little bit touching closer to what Ben was talking about a few minutes ago, which is the more important part is the integration, particularly into the overall business operations, right? That SD-WANs is just kind of a fundamentally different type of service. There is the enablement of a lot more customer control and customization. A lot of the intelligence, you could actually say from the network perspective, a lot of the intelligence is being decentralized out to the edge nodes to make a lot of decisions about how traffic flows. So yeah, the challenge that a lot of the customers that we work with have had is integrating this new type of service, which is very different than a traditional, I will build a pipe from you from my peering router to your A location, and then I'll build another one to your B location, and doing all that up front. It's just a very different type of operations, all the way down to the accounting and billing. In some cases, usage billing, things like that. It's just different than a lot of what our current clientele have done, and it's a lot of the back office challenges that have caused a more agita than the actual implementation.
Thank you, Dean. And the operative word in your response is challenges. Clearly, everything sounds great, and obviously the expectations are great here as well. But let's go ahead and talk about the challenges and how some of those challenges are being addressed. We're getting to some of that, but the question is, what are some of the critical challenges that operators face when deploying SD-WAN? And we did hit on some of this, but Ben, do you want to expand a little bit on some of those critical deployment challenges around SD-WAN?
Sure. There's a number of challenges that I think the industry faces on a regular basis with SD-WAN deployments. One is access to the right information up front, and the unknown gotchas that inevitably are still occurring out there in the industry. So when there is a lack of transparency, whether it's coming from a customer, a partner network, or your own internal understanding of the deployment, that's where we see some real challenges in the deployment. I think the second is the reality that, not everything is perfectly built out in the world. We don't have fiber everywhere. We don't have, 5G, that magically goes through every building in a perfect way. So the reality that things need to happen that are complex things like permitting in a local market to get entrance facilities into a building to build the fiber that you need for a location, or attaching an antenna, or bringing in private LTE to make wireless actually work inside of a building that has, certain types of, construct in it. All those things are realities. And the more information that you can triangulate into upfront in the planning process, the pricing process, the contracting process, the implementation process, to be aware and set expectations so you can manage through it, because that is a reality that, not everything is in real time, perfectly enabled with fiber and wireless everywhere operating at the same level. I think the third aspect of it is the uncertainty or the reliability of the data sometimes. To Brian's point, where the customer thinks they have 50 users and they really have 400, or the service provider says they have fiber inside the building terminated on the 7th floor, and it's actually in the zero manhole out in the front of the building, and there's no building access agreement in place. Those lack of transparencies or lack of rigor in the details, definitely are challenges that the industry, I think, is perfectly aware of, but has to deal with on a daily basis.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. And Dean, same question. What are some of the critical challenges network operators face when deploying SD-WAN?
So actually going all the way back to kind of the initial phase of evaluating and deciding to go with an SD-WAN service, a number of the instances we've been involved with, people have a really hard time rationalizing the business case. From the good fear is that it's going to cannibalize some of their existing higher cost, higher margin services. So getting that business case in place, or the justification, and everybody comfortable with rolling out this new type of service and where it fits within their pricing structure has been a consistent challenge across the industry, across the clients that I've worked with. Once they make the decision to go forward with it, I think I've talked a little bit about being able to integrate it into their overall operations, and this is when you get to the real engineering team, and you've got to convince them that they're not going to provision every circuit and every flow within the network, that SD-WAN, the actual SD-WAN orchestrator and SD-WAN endpoints are going to handle a bit of that, and getting them comfortable with the fact that they're not going to be quite as in control of the quality of service, that this is not a dedicated leased line type of service where you can control every bit and byte, and all you have to worry about is hardware or fiber failures. That this is, particularly in cases where people are going to be bringing their own connectivity in some cases. So, guys would wire up a location and they'll have a line directly on net back to their service provider, but they're also going to use a 5G modem backup, or cable, simple cable company, business class circuit as a backup. Being able to manage the expectations, and both of the customer and of the engineering team, has been kind of a cultural challenge in really trusting SD-WAN to provide the overall service that you think it's going to provide. And then the last part I want to address just real briefly is really kind of the higher level architecture and design of the flows around SD-WAN. Once it's up and operational, there's a lot of optimization that goes on in how to get customers traffic to the services they want. When it doesn't all come into the core and then be switched and go back out again, now you've got a lot of flexibility. I'm kind of rehashing this mesh kind of discussion a little bit, but being able to truly optimize your network and balance your network flows gives you more capacity within your service provider network, and quite frankly, also in a lot of cases can provide better quality of service to some of these cloud applications or other content providers. If you can direct the customer, directly there, east-west across your network instead of into the core and back out. So, you know, three big things. One's the business hurdle. The second one is actually operationalizing it. And the last one is optimizing it and keeping it optimized as your network continues to grow.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. And Brian, I saw you shaking your head a bunch during the answers to these questions, but from your seat, what are some of the critical challenges that network operators face when deploying SD-WAN?
Sure. So Ben hit one of our big problems that we always run into is the actual delivery of the access. And he mentioned permitting, and also they're landlords. There are landlords out there that might not let you bring in another service provider into the network. So you in the pre-quoting phase of the sales process, you use the tools, obviously, that we're here with Connected2Fiber, and you think you're going to be able to get that circuit from that regional provider or that national provider into that building, and then you run into those issues. So then from a project management perspective, that's when it's really important. I think, yes, there's a technical aspect to all of this, but it really comes down to the project managers to understand all of that, to deal with the delays that we're going to see and to negotiate through some things that you're not going to get that circuit that you thought you were going to get to. And then you have to manage the timeline. So obviously, there's a financial impact to go into SD-WAN, typically a savings. So the folks that make the financial decision at the customer are going to want that installed quickly, or the technical folks are going to want it installed right. So you're going to balance the I want it quick and I want it right. And also they're going to be operating in some form two networks for a period of time. So while there's a transition going, at least some locations, you're going to be running more circuits than you're going to have in the end. So that's a financial risk that you have to talk about and understand. And we've also, when we work with customers, is when it comes to SD-WAN and all the application statistics, and you talk about managed Wi-Fi that goes behind it, now you can talk about marketing and all of these budgets that exist at the customer level, that you're going to be able to provide them more data. So they might even actually give you some of their marketing budget because you're going to be providing them so much data of heat maps. Here's where everyone comes into your store, everyone goes to this place. So put your high margin quality product right there. Back here, no one goes there. So put your clearance rack there. We have seen customers actually bring on their marketing folks to understand that as part of the pre-sales process. And then Dean mentioned it, is giving up control of the network. A lot of network folks are used to having command line interface into a lot of every appliance that they have, and there's certainly some SD-WAN solutions that have that, but there are some that are just a GUI. So it is what it is, and if the product does it, it does it. If it doesn't do it. And that's where it becomes important to look at all the products on the marketplace, understand them all, and maybe even test more than one in your environment before you make that choice on what you're going to do. And then finally, voice. So the biggest thing is, again, Dean mentioned it, it's not private, it's not true QoS anymore. You're running over the internet, you're running over hopefully 2 tunnels back to the data center, back to your voice provider, but you're not getting guaranteed quality of service from the underlying transport carrier typically anymore if you're buying internet access. So explaining that to the tech folks, and some folks that I talked to might have tried voice over IP 10 years ago before SD-WAN was around. They tried to run it over the internet. It was terrible. And they felt the business burden when that happened. So going back into something and saying, no, don't worry, it's going to be fine. We have SD-WAN now. You have to get, that's something you have to sell through, and you have to get the IT folks really on board with that because they got burned in the past.
Got it. Thanks, Brian. And it is not surprising, perhaps, that this is the one question that we've spent the most amount of time on. So clearly there are a lot of challenges there. We are getting a couple of questions in from the attendees. So you're out there, don't be shy, send us your questions and we will definitely get to those. But guys, I'm going to go ahead and go off script for just a moment. We're talking about the reality right now and the challenges that SD-WAN deployment faces today. If we put on our well, pulled out our crystal balls, so to speak, and thought about what the challenges might be, say, 5 years from now. Do the challenges look the same 5 years from now as they are today with regard to deployment? Ben, you want to go first?
Sure, why not? I don't think so. I think the reality is the industry spends a tremendous amount of capital deploying more infrastructure, and the build out phase is not a forever thing. The upgrade phase is a forever thing, but the core infrastructure to get fiber antennas and more edge data centers in place, is aggressively going on today and will continue over the next 5 years. But it'll start to shift, the reality of what challenges occur and don't occur. I think the complexity from the application stack and how that is presented across the SD-WAN network to the users, wherever those users will be, or the multiple places they will be from home to work, will be a technical challenge and a coordination challenge and a tool challenge that is predominant in 5 years from now. And I think secondly is a shift in service providers. Going back to Brian's comment around the challenge of economics and savings. I think the service provider community as a whole has a fundamental need to change this, constant pressure of down, give more, forget less every single year. And the reality is SD-WAN and the new network technologies do provide a set of data analytics and customer experience and employee productivity experiences that are material, that fundamentally change how business can create value and deliver. And it's not just about selling the pipe, it's about impacting the marketing by understanding the flows of traffic. It's about making sure your employees have 2 to 5% more productivity because they have the right network enabled. And you look at that headcount cost and savings and opportunity, or the engagement with the customer's opportunity, and they dwarf the cost of the network. And so rationalizing and communicating that way, I think, is an important challenge, and one that we'll all collectively focus on over the next 5 years.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. Brian, Dean, any closing thoughts on challenges? Feeling like we covered it all?
Well, I just say completely agree with Ben. The access is always going to continue to get built out. We're going to see more regional providers step up, and we to talk about these towns and municipalities that are starting to build. It's going to be the technology and the expectation of, if I'm on my phone, if I'm at my computer, if I'm remote on an island, I should be able to access all of my tools and just continue doing what I'm doing. And that has to be secure. So there's going to be a lot of security implications over the next couple of years, but absolutely, I think from an access perspective, it's only going to get better. And I also, just to add, we see customers throw bandwidth at a problem today that don't have SD-WAN. And I think Ben mentioned, you get the analytics, you might find out that, wow, I thought I needed this gig circuit, but man, 99% of the time, except for the time when I do Windows updates all of a sudden, and at 2 a.m. once a month, I'm using 30% of the circuit. And we might not need as much access. There are definitely companies out there that are always going to need more bandwidth, but I think the analytics are going to allow customers to make that decision that they get today from moving to SD-WAN to decide what they're going to do from an access perspective 5 years from now.
Excellent. Dean, any closing thoughts here?
Just to say, I'm forever the optimist. I mean, to me, this is the first small, drip in, and the torrent, the rainfall is coming. I mean, I look at just the evolution. A couple of years ago, it was 6 weeks, 2 months to get a T1 provisioned, and then we moved into, it's a couple of days to a couple of weeks, depending on your team, to get MPLS tunnels designed and built. And now Brian was saying, we're 15 minutes and turning up a customer with new service. So the agility that it provides to bring customers onto the network, the agility for them to actually move around physically within the network without requiring a ton of reprovisioning on the core of the network and the aggregation parts of the network. think this is kind of that first ripple into, what is going to be a lot of new endpoints, new devices, new customers being able to get onto the network. And, to Ben's point, finding that revenue that we need, instead of just kind of continuing this race to the bottom, but finding the value added revenue. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean. Gentlemen, moving on. The question is, what impact has the rise in connected devices had on the development and deployment of SD-WAN? Again, the rise of connected devices had on the easy for me to say, development and deployment of SD-WAN. And what are some of the trends that are accelerating SD-WAN adoption? Brian, over to you.
I think it's BYOD and guest Wi-Fi is honestly where we're seeing so much more. Just a couple of years ago, you walked into any location and you would be surprised if they had guest Wi-Fi. And now it's expected. So you go from, I have a T1, it's all I need, I'm doing POS transactions, my network's fine, and it's been that way for 5, 6, 7, 10 years, and I haven't had to change anything. To all of a sudden, the business leaders going, I need Wi-Fi in these locations right now. And you got to figure out a way to do that. You got this MPLS T1 that's in contract, you renewed it for 3 years, 6 months ago. There's nothing you could do. You have to deploy something that you can securely and quickly get your business leaders the access into the location so they can help their customers. So that's where I'm seeing it most, is the actual BYOD and the Wi-Fi and the expansion of digital signage, et cetera, in the actual premise.
Very good. Ben, same question.
I agree with Brian. I think guest Wi-Fi, the digital signage and the transformations going on there from a communication and a marketing standpoint, both within the office and frankly outside in the environment, and then BYOD are the three drivers. I'm not a huge believer that IoT has fundamentally changed anything and is materially impacting us yet. I think that's more of a hype cycle we have yet to get into. Absolutely believe that there's real value in the smart city efforts and IoT inside the manufacturing, but that's not a material impact in the market yet. But digital signage, guest Wi-Fi, are now table stakes. They're fundamental, and if you address it just from purely a circuit perspective or an SD-WAN perspective, great. But if you look at the business impact, even better, and really helping us as a service provider community transform into the value creators and enablers, in the market, I think is a really important step for all of us.
Very good. And Dean, your final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think SD-WAN again. I'm kind of forward looking with where I'm kind of targeting stuff, and I see SD-WAN, the agility that it provides, the ability to bring customers either I want to say on net, but it's actually on service because it may not be an on net connection, but to bring them into your service portfolio, from anywhere they can connect and get IP connectivity. I mean, we see this being driven down. Right now, SD-WAN, I guess you would say, is sort of the branch level. I'm seeing, SASE, right? Secure access, secure edge, driving down to the home office and individual, laptop fundamentally level of this zero trust, but I need to connect and get services across the internet. That's SD-WAN is just beginning to unlock the potential of that and the ability to provide services where you want them, when you want them. It's like I said, I think it's the first drop in what's a good rainstorm for the industry.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you, Dean. Any other comments there before we move along? All right, we're gonna stick with you then too, Dean, if you don't mind. Our last formal question, and then we're gonna jump into some questions from the attendees. So, Dean, your question is, we spent a good 15, 20 minutes on the challenges, but let's talk about how those challenges and how those problems are currently being addressed. So how are the problems being solved today, and how do we optimize the solution to streamline the deployment of SD-WAN in the future? Again, Dean, that is your question.
Sure. Well, let me start. I'll start back. I had kind of those three different facets of the deployment. The business side, I think that's proven itself out. I think this is again, a trend that nobody's going to be able to ride against for too long. If you don't deploy SD-WAN as a product, your customers are going to buy it directly. The enterprises are going to buy it directly, at which point you're really a commodity provider. So I think, it's in everybody as a service provider, their interest to be able to offer an SD-WAN service to those where it fits. The second part of it is really the engineering part of it, and that's really just experience. We're getting engineers now that have seen this work and are comfortable with it, being able to provide services without waking them up at 3 a.m. every morning. They don't have to monitor the network on a minute-by-minute basis. So I think we're getting significantly more comfortable internally at the engineering level that this product is going to do what it says it can do, and that we can manage customer expectations so that it isn't a bad thing for both customer, a bad experience for customer or service provider. And the last thing is, I just see them starting to build SD-WAN into everything, like any edge point connectivity. I look at a few of the firewall providers now have SD-WAN as just simply a license, an add-on license. So at some point, the rolling it out is really going to be just turn on a license or, add in a module to your existing, whatever you've got device that's there, and you get the capabilities and the additional functionality that SD-WAN brings. So we're still working our way through that a little bit. But if you watch, all the SD-WAN providers are slowly getting gobbled up by bigger guys who are incorporating them directly into their stacks. I mean, we had 3 Vs a while ago. We used to work with VeloCloud, Viptela, and Versa, and those are basically being swallowed up into bigger guys, and Silver Peak, they're all getting swallowed up into bigger ecosystems. So I think SD-WAN is really the challenges with deploying it are going to be smoothed out by all these guys building them into a larger ecosystem and providing them as just one more feature set in their existing products.
Excellent. Thank you, Dean. Brian, same question. How are those challenges getting solved?
Sure. So I think what, from a service provider perspective, and Dean kind of hit on it, it used to be, hey, we're going to do Versa, or we're going to do Viptela, and that's going to be our solution. And you quickly found that it's a square peg, round hole. So all of our customers have different needs based on what they do. And now you're seeing the service providers add in more. Not many, if any, at this point, have just one offering. We do 6 because we have different customers' needs. And 3 years ago, you didn't see that. It was just one solution. So giving the customer the ability to test multiple solutions. I mean, we've gone on planes, we've gone down to the lab environment, we've put a VeloCloud box on a desk and a Meraki box on the desk at the time, and test your applications. And then it became, okay, this my application works. This one's X cheaper, this one's Y cheaper. I have to have so many users upset with this and leave my business before it makes financial sense. And then they do the C-level CFO does a financial analysis on that and said, what really makes sense? So that's what we have really seen as service providers, and how they're changing the way they approach this. And I shouldn't say gone are the days, but having it embedded in the MPLS network was really important way back in the day, and I think it's becoming less and less important as they adopt and they bring on new SD-WAN solutions. And Dean also mentioned, like, the firewall vendors are now getting into this, and in some instances, the firewall package is actually the add-on now. The actual edge appliance is marketed and works as an SD-WAN appliance, and then you're adding the firewall package from a vendor who was literally just a firewall vendor 7 years ago. So it's really unique, and it's really exciting times.
Thank you, Brian. And Ben, your final words on how some of the challenges on SD-WAN deployment are being solved today.
I think it sums up as, ecosystem transparency with trust, attribution, and a state of connectedness to set yourself up for SD-WAN success. ultimately, driving into the details, building your digital blueprint of your network fabric and that unique positioning, so you have the data, the information to, really tackle the challenge of whatever SD-WAN deployment that you're going into, and making sure that the providers of the last mile that you're coordinating with, are connected, real-time APIs, give access to the most current information to avoid some of the challenges of not knowing whether service providers physically there, what floors they're on, is a building access agreement, but then pushing, to that next level of attribution around the demarcation, the environment of the customers, the size, the scope, and setting your team up for success. I think those are the key things in 2021 that if we collectively all work towards, we're going to have a better environment and get success. Because to Dean's point, it is just starting. It is a fantastic time to be in this industry, and the next 5 years are shaping up to be some of the best years that we've ever had.
Awesome, Ben, gentlemen, we did it. We got through the formal questions in the time allotted. We've got about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one question from the audience, and we're going to do so speed dating style. So you each get 30 seconds on this one. Here is the question. If you were to pick the role of the network in positioning to win enterprise cloud revenue, including unified communications, security, and other services, how important would you say it is over the next 5 years? And you're on the clock, Brian.
You have to have it. You have to have a direct physical, and you also have to have the ability to do virtual cross connects into these digital fabrics. You just have to have it. You're probably not going to build out to every POP in the country, but utilizing the digital fabrics that are available for us to consume as a carrier, you have to sign up for those. You have to offer them to your customers, because all your customers are going to have different. You got AWS, Azure, sure, but there are other cloud applications that your customers are going to want access to. So you just have to have it.
Brian, you did it. Ben, your turn.
Must have, ultimately, is how to position and win, and ultimately why we all here to drive business and create value for our individual stakeholders. But those network fabrics, no one has enough capital to build everywhere themselves. This is an ecosystem, and managing your unique recipe, getting a state of connectedness, driving into the details to set up for automation, get to a real-time environment is absolutely business critical.
All right, Dean.
So absolutely, you got to have a network to move those bits and bytes around. I think in the near future, we're going to begin to see the value and the dollars follow the quality. And I kind of come back to latency and jitter, the actual performance of the network for a lot of the real-time applications. And the ability to extend that cloud farther out into your network. So whether that's a public cloud or extending the customer's private cloud out into edge devices within your network, or CPE devices on theirs, the ability to provide those kinds of services on your network, virtualized services, as well as just transport bits and bytes, is going to be the recipe for future success.
Awesome, Dean. Gentlemen, apparently you have done some speed dating before, but we could talk about that perhaps in the next roundtable. And that is all the time we have today. Thank you to our panelists and to the attendees, and of course to Connected2Fiber for hosting the discussion. Thank you and be well.